Is Vladimir Putin playing poker with Joe Biden? And that's a dangerous thing, and we've got to talk about it. Let's go bold. The question becomes, are we headed to war in Ukraine? Yes, that's a question today. That's a fundamental question we've got to ask ourselves. You've seen everything in the news media recently, and I know several of you have asked me to give my thoughts on this situation. I appreciate you asking me to do this, and I don't mind doing it. As most of you know, I'm an old soldier. I spent about 34 years working national security issues before I got called to be working for the kingdom of God, which I love to do. But I spent a number of years working on similar problems in Iraq and also in countries in Eastern Europe and doing NATO operations. And one of the things I think we have to understand in this case with Ukraine and Russia and the what the media is describing in many cases as a pending war, Vladimir Putin is not playing chess. And a lot of times we like to, I used to hear the comments that, from pundits that, Putin was playing chess and Barack Obama was playing checkers or vice versa. It was Putin playing chess against Trump and he was playing checkers and that sort of thing. Here's what I'm going to tell you I think Putin's doing. I think he's playing poker. He's not playing chess. Now, James Carafano from the Heritage Foundation made this exact point really in an excellent article that he wrote this week. And also I saw some writings from a former MI6 agent from Great Britain. He wrote something similar. Now, I've known Jim Carafano for a number of years. He was a professor of mine, probably about 30 years ago. I really, really respect his thoughts on national security and especially his thoughts on Eastern Europe. Now, as you see, and a Soviet from a military perspective, and there's a lot of things I respect about James. He's got some really good points, but I want you to look at that picture of Putin, and I really think that describes. He's been playing this poker game for a long time. Now, you guys know Putin is an old KGB colonel. He's very, very witty, and but he likes to gamble, and I don't mean from a Las Vegas sense. I mean, this is kind of how he does things. He kind of makes gambling his point many times, and he makes Carafano made this point that Putin is playing poker. Well, what I want you to know, folks, is not the first time that Putin and Russia has played poker and not chess, and I think this can be a strategic problem for the United States because he is playing poker against the Biden administration. And you saw, the disastrous consequences that happened in Afghanistan, and we're going to talk about here in that in a second. But that's leading Putin to make some assumptions I think he may be wrong on. Now, with all this focus on Russia, and I'll just say, it breathes well in the Beltway if you're in D.C., and it breathes well on Foggy Bottom because, we spent, 4 years and, I don't know, $50, $60 million, with the whole Russian collusion, and Russia stole the 2016 election for Trump, and Trump was illegitimate president, and I got all that. So politically, it's a hot potato when you talk about Russia. Now, in what I want to tell you, though, if you look at it from the Beltway perspective, the whole idea of the military-industrial complex is kind of drawn to this whole idea with a fight with Russia. Now, let me just say up front, China is about 1,000 times a greater geopolitical threat to the United States than Russia is. Folks, it's not even close. If you think about it, I mean, it's not even close, and I want everybody to understand that. What the Chinese, what the communist Chinese are doing inside the U.S. right now, and out on our southern border, and in South America, and in North Africa, and throughout the Pacific is such a greater threat to our national security than anything that Russia is doing right now. I mean, that's just the honest-to-God truth. Threat-wise to the U.S. and our vital national security answer. It's not even close from a national security perspective. I want everybody to understand that. Now, So you guys know, from a Christian perspective and from the Southern Baptist Convention, we have a lot of missionaries in Russia for good reason. We want to reach all the. We want to, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But we also have, believe it or not, we also have a lot of missionaries right now in Ukraine, and this is obviously a problem because it affects the gospel and it affects the Great Commission, but over the past several years, I would say since the last war in Ukraine in 2014, the number of missionaries have increased pretty substantially. Now, I want to start with some background on Ukraine and just so you kind of have a sense, because a lot of times you just kind of get bits and pieces of this on the nightly news or wherever you get your news, on Facebook or social media. But to give you some background on Ukraine, Ukraine was part of the old Soviet Union before the USSR collapsed in the 1990s. And at that time, they separated from Russia. Now, this reality has really irritated Vladimir Putin for years. So much that in 2014, Putin attacked into Ukraine and seized Crimea. Now, he needed that for a strategic foothold, for a number of strategic reasons, but also operational reasons, especially with his energy. And we're going to talk about this here in a second. But some of it was national security interest for Russia, but it was also trying to get an establishment against NATO too. So I think you're going to have to look at that from the background. Now, back in 2014, Putin knew that he could play poker against the U.S. because, he had already, he knew that President Obama and Secretary of State at the time, Hillary Clinton, they talked a good game, but in the end, they're not going to do anything, and that's exactly what happened. And the U.S. and the rest of NATO didn't have the political will to do anything against Putin. They were scared of him, to be frank. Now, but the good news and all that we saw in Ukraine before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I would say, having spent some time in that part of the world, Ukraine was always, as I remember, they were probably more pro-Russian than anything, but the dynamic has changed over time now that they've had their independence for a while. And since the Russian government, the tide is kind of turned inside Ukraine. A couple of things have happened since 2014 when Russia launched their offensive into Crimea. First of all, there was a whole lot of Ukraine casualties. Most estimates put this around about 15,000 killed. And Russia, like any of the good Marxists, they always overplay their hand with everything. And they basically, from a tactical level, when they invaded Ukraine, they basically wiped off 2 brigades from the face of the earth. They drummed them. They had 2 brigades set up. They used massive amounts of artillery. They used drones. And I will just tell you, the United States and specifically the U.S. Army, because I looked at this problem pretty hard when I was still in the Army before I retired in 2014. And I looked at it later doing some missions for the defense industry after that. But Russia had, we learned a great deal from what Russia did in 2014, especially some of the very creative ways that the Russians would use simple and basic drones. They did some pretty creative things with them. And but also it really introduced us to how well the Russians fight in what the U.S. Army calls today multi-domain warfare, or multi-domain operations. I'm not sure. I don't keep up with all that anymore. But at the time, they could fight very well in all the domains at the lowest tactical level. And you see that, and what you would see is they're going to have massive amounts of artillery. That's nothing really new. They've always had massive amounts of artillery since back in World War I time frame. The Russians are very good at deception, and so you're going to see some of that. And here's what I'll tell you about their air superiority when you fight in the air domain is basically drones, and they're going to have a lot. Now, I will tell you, you just see the things that the Ukrainian have. They have improved a lot on this, and I know I read a report, and I can't remember who was a source on this, but Turkey is giving them a lot of advanced drones. The other thing too that the Russians do very well is they'll attack your cyber. They're very good at that. They jam and they cut off the Internet of Things, and they're very good in the space domain. And the sea domain really doesn't apply as much here, but the Russians do this very well because they never have to worry about rules of engagement compared to the U.S., and that's something you have to consider when you're dealing with the Russians and you're dealing with their army. They don't care about having that horrible fratricide incident on CNN. They really don't care. Whereas the U.S. soldiers, we fight with a huge disadvantage when we have to go and apply the ROE like you should. But that's just the consequences of war and being the good guy, okay? Now, I will also tell you that Crimea gave the Russians a lot of access to Germany or Western Europe. So there's some background here, and that kind of gives you what you could see what's causing this up front. Now, just in general, wars are fought for three basic reasons. And, folks, I'm going to tell you this. This hasn't changed since the great commander Joshua marched around the walls of Jericho. But those three things, and I think I've talked to you about them before, and that is fear, honor, and interest, okay? Those three things. Remember, every time you see, whether it's North Korea, whether it's China, whether it's Iraq, whether it's Iran, those three things are always going to influence your war. Fear, honor, interest, period. Now, let's look at this here. You see that picture of President Biden and Vladimir Putin. Let's start with fear. Here's my assessment. Putin has zero fear of the Biden administration. We saw what happened in Afghanistan. We saw the strategic consequences of that. It was horrible. We also saw that we have a Democratic Congress right now. He has no fear of them either because it's kind of in disarray right now with all the polling and the COVID crisis and all the other things that's going on internally in the United States. So he's aware of that, and his people are aware of that. And so these things have consequences, okay? And so right now, Putin has this small window that he could theoretically make a move into Ukraine. Now, this is what I think a lot of the pundits in the Beltway are kind of considering right now. But you notice that Putin did not lay a finger on Ukraine when Trump was in office. Now, I'm not here to support President Trump. I don't care what you think about Trump's foreign policy. I don't care what you think about Trump politically. But here's the thing. He was unpredictable. And frankly, his sanctions were working against Russia. And they worked very, very well against Russia. And I believe that Putin had in the back of his mind this fear of Trump that he doesn't have now, that he doesn't have of Biden or that he had of President Obama. However, he does not fear he does not fear the U.S., but I will tell you something he does fear, and this could be in the U.S.'s pocket. He does fear a NATO-led Ukraine. And what I mean by that is if Ukraine was to be a part of NATO, take NATO membership, and I believe that this is part of his calculation right now, because here's the thing: if Mexico was a part of Russia's alliance, I think the fear factor in the U.S. would go through the roof, kind of like the Cuban Missile Crisis. And a lot of times, it's just what you see this. This is how this fear and honor and interest always kind of rears their ugly head, but this is what usually starts wars, okay? And I just want you to think about that, the fear, because Putin does not want, nor does the Russian people want, a NATO alliance right on their border, which would be Ukraine. So, now, honor. Let's put it this way. Putin's base in Russia, a lot of them want to go back to the old glory days of the USSR. And so Putin's an old KGB colonel, and he wants the same thing. Okay, and that's what a lot of the oligarchs and the Russian elites want. They want to be like the old red Soviet Union. Everything about, and the other thing that you've got to consider here, everything about Putin centers on his ego. And like I said, Ukraine at one time was part of the old Soviet Union, and I believe a lot of Russians want to go back to that time. Now, let's go to this thing called interest, because this is where the complexities of this are going to probably rise to the level of which would cause a war. Now, here's the thing, and this is what's driving this more than any of the fear and the honor. And that is where this is where it gets interesting. Now, Europe has been, as you see that picture there, Europe has been one big, fat, new Green Deal mistake for the last decade or more. I'm just telling you. The Europeans have basically shut down about all forms of any type of energy besides wind and solar. Okay, they shut down fracking. They've shut down drilling for oil. Coal plants. I think they're going to close their last coal plant, I believe, in 2038. And they have done this so fast now that and nuclear power, clean nuclear power. So they've done this so fast now that when the environment doesn't cooperate and you don't have a lot of sun and you don't have a lot of wind, and you have the oil prices around the world being manipulated like people like Putin or OPEC, okay, here's what happens. The energy prices skyrocket. So now guess what? Because of these Green New Deal policies that Europe has had for, I don't know, 15, 20 years, now they have to, when these things run short, 40% of all European energy is coming from where? It comes from Russia. This is what it gets down to, folks. This is where this is that 50-pound problem that's right in the middle of the room. Okay, this is why Putin has decided to play poker, because he can. And I'm going to tell you guys, he has a lot of chips in the form of energy, and this is what it always boils down to. And so here's what I'll tell you guys. And that's okay if Europe wants to have some Green New Deal stuff. And I'm not necessarily things that's bad, but you just can't get rid of all of it and think it's going to be just fine. And it's not going to potentially cause World War III. The other thing that Putin has, he has a large army. He has a bunch of energy that Europe desperately needs. So he's playing with a lot of chips on his table right now. He's at the final table, and he's got a lot of chips. Okay, and he's got some pretty good cards he can play, okay, because Europe desperately needs his energy, especially if there's starting to be international price gouging again. And I'll just tell you guys, the stupidity of the European green energy policies have put Europe in this place, okay, and this is why we're on, some would say, the brink of war. I don't think we are, but we'll talk about that here in a second. Putin has weaponized Russia's energy supplies before, and even as recently as raising the European anxiety last year when he refused to ramp up the gas supplies when they had that was induced by the low wind, okay, in the season that gripped the whole European continent. And so he was kind of trying to strong arm people into approving what? The Nord Stream pipeline into Germany. Okay, this is a big deal. This is a big political hot potato because, of course, President Biden, shut down the Keystone pipeline, which would have saved us millions and millions and millions of dollars, and would have kept our gas prices low. Okay, but they wanted to finish that pipeline that would allow Russia to circumvent Ukraine network. Now, here's the thing. President Trump, he stopped the Nord Stream pipeline cold in the water. But guess who started it again? President Biden. Now, see, here's the thing. Biden's already gave him this like his first day in office. And Trump was trying to encourage, okay, at the time, everybody, was griping about Trump. But that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to encourage the European and NATO to be dependent on other resources of oil besides Russia, because when you put all your dependency there, this is where you're gonna pay the price for it. Okay, but the other thing that Trump was trying to do, he was trying to base this on the U.S. oil that we could have sent over there because we were drilling a lot of oil at the time and we were making a lot of money as a country off of it. Okay, now here's the thing. Let's talk about U.S. interests for a second. The Biden administration is using the crisis as kind of somewhat as a political distraction to some degree. That's going on. Okay, it happens with both parties. It happens with, it's happened with other administrations. So that's nothing really new. But there are some U.S. interests. Now, I'll just tell you, specifically, though, the former Eastern Bloc countries that we have trade with, and quite frankly, some of those Eastern Bloc countries are more friendly to the U.S. than a lot of the Western European stuck-up countries are. I'll just tell you, that's the truth. The other thing, if you are a student of history and you studied this region at any time, there's this. It's kind of a strategic flashpoint for world wars. World War One. I'm just saying, World War Two. But one of the things I want to go back to is the key on understanding this is China. Now, how much leverage does China give Russia? That's a question, okay? Because here's the thing. China loves the fact that the Biden administration is putting all these resources and all these eyes on China. And domestically, politically, of course, you got ABC, NBC. Oh, they're all talking about everybody's looking over here, okay? Nobody's looking at China. You starting to get the picture? Now, you're starting to see an alliance with China and Russia. Now, to be frank, they've never really liked each other, but the old adage that goes here, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's kind of like this. It keeps our focus off China. So they're kind of doing with Russia right now because they are a lot greater superpower than Russia is. I'll just tell you that straight up. But they're kind of using Russia like they do North Korea. They don't want an all-out war with the U.S., but they want something kind of in the middle that would keep us bogged down politically, economically, and so they want us in that kind of conflict, that permanent conflict. So they can do other things to the U.S. without us reacting to China. Now, here's the thing. So the question becomes, and it always does, so is it worth sending U.S. sons and daughters to fight and die in Ukraine? And the answer is, I'll tell you, no. There's a lot we can do diplomatically. There's a lot we can do informationally, and there's a lot we can do economically. Now, every day that Putin does not launch a full-scale attack into Ukraine gets stronger. I'm just going to tell you that. That's just the honest to God truth. And this is a valid argument. I know. However, Ukraine's army, I'll just tell you, I think they're significantly better than they were back in 2014. And the Ukrainian people are much more resolute, I believe, than they were 8 years ago. Putin does not want Russia to get bogged down in a long-term war. He doesn't. And my assessment is simply this. In the end, I don't think Russia will launch a full-scale invasion. I know that's what the media is saying. I know that's what all the 50-pound heads are saying. This never really fought in wars before. And I know that's what a lot of people are saying. That's one of the pundits in the Beltway are saying. But, yeah, I got it. He's got 100,000 soldiers on the border, okay? But here's some indicators I want you to watch, just, as a citizen of the United States. Here's some indicators. Number one, do you know how hard it is to sustain and feed an army of 100,000? Guys, it's hard. It is really, really hard. And the costs are enormous here, okay? Now, why would he do that, okay? He's already got tons of spies in the country. He's already done cyber attacks. But I'll just tell you guys, his logistical trains are not near as sophisticated as ours are. Okay, and it's even hard for us. Look how hard it is for the U.S. to maintain 20,000 soldiers or 30,000 soldiers. And the complexities of this are hard, okay? So So he won't keep an army in the field very long. Now, right now, what I've researched on the internet, and from what I've just seen, what I've just seen, his logistic tail for those 100,000 soldiers is very small. And this is what a lot of military think tanks are seeing online right now. So he doesn't have the large amounts of supply. So when President Biden kind of said that they were going to attack within the next 24 hours, or he said something stupid like that, I can't remember what it was, I just don't think it was feasible. And this is why he kind of got the blowback from Ukraine that he did, okay, from the Ukrainian president. You need a lot of supplies to launch an attack with that many soldiers. Now, with that in mind, he does have a lot of soldiers on the border. But here's what I think. Here's what I think he'll do. He will play his Marxist hand, his communist hand. I think he's going to start a significant, pretty good proxy war. He's already got that going on. You guys know he's already launched massive cyber attacks in Ukraine. That's been well documented. But does he launch a full-scale attack? I don't think so. I think if he does, it's going to be limited in scope. And I think he'll immediately try to go for a negotiated ceasefire as soon as he possibly can, because he can't sustain that army. And he doesn't want the sanctions and everything else that's going to come in there. But he's going to try to negotiate his best deal, so he won't have to sustain a fight, because he doesn't want to do that. Yes, the Russians would win. Yes, they could take Kiev, but it's going to come as a cost. And the terrain's not easy. The enemy's determined, and I'll just tell you guys, it's a lot harder than it seems. Okay, because you can get to Kiev, but then once you get there, what are you going to do with it? Okay, it's kind of like we were in Iraq. Yeah, we could get to Baghdad anytime we want, but when you break it, like Colin Powell said, you own it, and then it's hard. Okay, but there's one caveat to this, and that I'm saying in this that we don't know, and that's simply this: if there's a large push to make Ukraine part of NATO, and I think if that happens, I think all bets are off. If that is the strategy for the U.S. We really need to look hard at that. And I'm not saying, I've got kind of mixed emotions on that, okay? But if you're going to make that your policy and you're going to put that out there and you're going to try to make Ukraine a part of NATO, then the U.S. really needs to be ready for the second and third order effects. And this is why this is important. They've got a large stockpile of nukes. Don't remember that, folks. A lot of times we gloss over that, but that is the big elephant in the room right now. Now, up to right now, you guys know the Biden administration has sent about a battalion-level size task force of about 3,000 soldiers. They are not in Ukraine per se, but as the Biden administration has acknowledged, and I know their press secretary Kirby did the other day, they have advisors in Ukraine. We have advisors in Ukraine, okay? And they've been there. We've a lot of different things, okay? But as John Kirby said, they don't plan on moving them out anytime soon. So if you want to do some more, just go to the state. You want to do some more research on it, just go to the U.S. State Department. .gov, and you can see a lot of this. We have a lot of foreign military sales with them. We have a lot of equipment with them, and with that comes contractors, it comes logistics. There's all kinds of other things that you see over there. Now, if you look at this picture of Putin, regardless how Ukraine plays out, we have seen Vladimir Putin's two most potent weapons, and for messing with the Western world. He's done this for a long, long time now. Force and energy, those two things. Here's the thing, folks. We have to checkmate his energy. I mean, NATO needs to ramp up a couple of things. They need to ramp up their conventional strategies. They need to ramp up their strategic turns, because here's the thing. When you look at this transatlantic community, they need energy security. They need it desperately. And this is what's causing, this is the root cause of the problem. Because, again, they've gotten so into the Green New Deal. They don't have a vibrant private energy sector that delivers, reliable and affordable energy. They need that desperately, just like the U.S. does, because we're going to be caught in the same boat, folks. And we could make fun of the Europeans, but we're going to be in the same way. Everything needs to be really a mix of this energy policy would be a mix of U.S. exports, natural gas, and you're going to have to see those things. And we're going to have to probably, they probably need to relook at the nuclear energy. Now, finally, what can the U.S. do about this? And here's what I would say. First, President Biden he doesn't need to comment on a lot of these things, because what happens is every time he opens his mouth, it's gigantic strategic consequences that a whole bunch of everybody else has to police up. It just is. So he just needs to his advisors don't need to let him talk about this, okay? The second thing is target the Russian oligarchy. Target their money, target their influence, their spheres of influence at the international level, and start squeezing them. Start denying their passports. Start doing all those things, because that's going to get at the Russian power base. That's what can get to Putin. Now, get other energy resources for Europe to rely on. Don't rely on this big footprint from Russia. It's just stupid. Okay, it's great to use other forms of clean energy, but don't get away from all of it. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Russia will blow up your carbon footprint like faster than Al Gore, selling his carbon monoxide gas to everybody. Okay. Now, the fourth thing I would do is continue to outfit the Ukraine with good kit. And what I mean by that, good equipment. I know back in 2014, the Obama administration sent some blankets and some 5.56 rounds, a couple of things. No, they need tow missiles. They need drones. They need all these kind of sophisticated capacities, because you want not necessarily a NATO Ukraine, but you want them to be able to defend themselves, okay? You want them to have Putin not being able to play the poker that he's playing right now. The other thing I would do is make the Europeans do their job. Why does it have to be the U.S. all the time? Now, because they've got NATO over there, and of course we've always been the big supplier of NATO. Now, having said all that, here's what I want you to take a look at from a disciple of Jesus, because geopolitical politics affects a lot of things. And we as disciples of Jesus, and we need to look at all these things that can affect our geopolitical politics, which is, I know I've got people that are in the military in my church. I got people that work for the government. I got people that are contractors, and all these things affect shepherds. Now, I want to read you a verse that comes from the book of Matthew. It says, "Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and I will deceive many. And you will hear wars and rumors of wars. See to it that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But in the end, it's not yet. For nations will rise against nations, and kingdoms against kingdoms, and there will be," what? "Famines, pestilence, there will be earthquakes and diseases in various places, and all these things are the beginnings of sorrows." Jesus said, when you look at this in Matthew chapter 24, I'm not saying that this is going to be the tribulation, but what Jesus is telling us, I want you to go back there. When he tells you these things, he says he is the Christ, and many of you be deceived, and you're going to hear about these things, but he's telling us not to be troubled. Okay, now, what can we do as Christians about it? Well, I'll just tell you, we live in a perilous times. Yes, here domestically in the United States and also on the international scale. But here's what I would do. Pray for the president. You may not like President Biden, and I disagree with about 99.9% of everything he says and does, and his administration, okay? But here's the thing. We as disciples of Jesus still have to pray for our leaders. That's what the Bible requires. And you saw look at Daniel for the example. Keep praying for our leaders, because this is our country, okay? Because we have to do what's right in God's eyes. Now, pray for our soldiers. Man, they in our Navy and our sailors and our Marines, okay? Pray for them. Pray also for our missionaries, okay? Because I'll just tell you, folks, anytime these things happen to in these countries where our missionaries are, or these countries, or like with our soldiers. It is having been there and having been in war zones, it's a tremendous toll on your family as a soldier. So pray for their families. And yes, think about this, guys. If God can change Nebuchadnezzar, he can change about anybody. I hope this has been beneficial for you, and that, my brothers and sisters in Christ, is how we go bold. God bless you, and go bold.